Welcome to Fright Club. The first rule of Fright Club is you do talk about Fright Club. Based on true events. Echo Chamber. I have not slept since the river took her. Not truly slept, though my body may lie prostrate upon the narrow cot in this chamber of wood and wire, my eyes closed as if in slumber, my breath shallow and measured like that of a man at peace. But peace. Ah, peace is a luxury denied to those who have looked upon the face of death and found it wearing the visage of one beloved. No, my mind, that restless and accursed engine, labors ever through the black watches of the night, grinding the same terrible images into dust, only to reassemble them with fresh torment at each turn of the hour. It is for this reason, this ceaseless, gnawing vigil, that I have taken refuge in the highest room of this decaying manor, an attic long abandoned to moths and memory, which I have lately transformed into a sanctuary of sound, or rather of its careful surgical excision. For I am Silas Vorne, once known in those distant days when men still spoke my name without pity, as an inventor of acoustic marvels, devices that could capture the fleeting sigh of a violin or the murmur of a lover's vow and fix them, as if by sorcery, upon the soft flesh of wax. And now, in my desolation, I employ these same arts not for wonder, but for resurrection. Before me, upon a table scarred by acid and ink, rests the object of my obsession, a single Edison phonograph, its brass fittings tarnished to the color of old bruises, its diaphragm cracked like the shell of some forsaken egg. Upon its spindle turns a cylinder of brown wax, Eliza's final recording. She made it on the eve of her drowning, though I knew it not then. A keepsake, she had called it, smiling that fragile smile which always seemed to hold more sorrow than joy. In case I am ever far from you, God, how those words now coil about my heart like serpents. The cylinder is damaged, gouged, I believe, by the very fingers that once traced my cheek with such tenderness. A deep fissure runs its length, rendering much of the recording a hiss of static, a ghostly susurration like wind through a crypt. Yet, in the quieter passages, those rare moments when the crackle subsides, I swear I hear her voice, clear as dew upon a spider's web. Silas, remember. But what am I to remember? That is the question which gnaws at my reason. For memory, that treacherous faculty shifts like river silt beneath my feet. Some days I recall her standing at the bank, her white dress fluttering like a surrender flag. Other days, I see only the water, black, implacable, swallowing her whole without a ripple. And always, always, the silence that followed. A silence so profound it seemed the world itself had ceased to breathe. I have played this cylinder 107 times. I count each revolution as a penitent counts his beads, and with each playback, I swear I note, subtle alterations in the sound. Yesterday, the static seemed to form a word. Why? Today, the pause between her phrases lengthened, as if she were listening, waiting for my reply. Fool, madman. You will say I am conjuring phantoms from noise, and perhaps you are right. Yet what is sound, if not the vibration of air, made meaningful by a listening mind? And what is a ghost, if not a memory too potent to die? The room itself conspires in this delusion, or revelation. I have lined the walls with layers of felt and cork, hung heavy drapes over the single grime-caked window, stuffed the cracks beneath the door with rags. No external sound may enter here. This chamber is sealed as a tomb. And yet, there are sounds. Not from without, but from within the very fibers of the house. A faint ticking, like a clock with no hands. A sigh from the floorboards, as if the wood remembers the weight of her footsteps. And once, only once, I heard, beneath the phonograph's whirring, the soft, wet sound of something dragging through reeds, the sound of the riverbank at dusk. I tell myself it is the wind. But there is no wind in this sealed room. Tonight, I shall attempt a repair. With a needle finer than a surgeon's, I will fill the gouge in the wax with a compound of my own devising, beeswax and resin, mixed with a single drop of my own blood. Why not? Let my essence mingle with hers in this final communion. Perhaps then, the voice will speak plainly. Perhaps then, she will tell me what I must remember. Or perhaps, she will tell me what I already know. The lamp gutters. Shadows leap like specters upon the walls. I wind the phonograph spring, a slow, deliberate motion. Each click a heartbeat, counting down to revelation or ruin. I lower the needle, and the dead begin to speak. I had repaired the cylinder with hands steadier than my soul would allow. The beeswax resin mixture, into which I had indeed let fall that single crimson bead from my pricked finger, had set hard and smooth beneath the lamplight, gleaming like a scar healed over a wound too deep for flesh alone to close. It was near midnight when I wound the spring once more. My breath held as if in prayer, though to what God I knew not. Certainly not to any who would suffer a woman like Eliza to be claimed by the cold, indifferent river. The needle descended. The cylinder turned. At first, only the familiar hiss. The white noise of oblivion filled the chamber. Then, faint but unmistakable, her voice. Silas, remember the lilacs? Ah, the lilacs, how they bloomed that spring along the river bank, their purple clusters heavy with dew, their scent so thick it clung to our clothes like a second skin. She had woven a crown of them for me once, laughing as she placed it upon my brow. King of melancholy, she'd called me, her eyes bright with affection and something else, something I now recognize as foreboding. I leaned closer, my ear nearly touching the horn, as if by proximity I might draw her spirit through the brass and into my very bones. The static ebbed. Her voice grew clearer, softer, more intimate than memory had preserved. You stood beneath them and watched. My blood turned to ice. I jerked back as though scalded. The chair overturned with a crash that echoed like a gunshot in the soundless room. Watched? What blasphemy was this? I had not watched. I had been in the study, poring over schematics for a new diaphragm design. Yes, that was the truth. I had heard the splash, run to the bank, and found only ripples spreading across the black water, and her shawl caught on a reed like a white flag of surrender. Yet why did my heart hammer so violently against my ribs, as if seeking escape from a cage of lies? Why did my palms sweat despite the attic's chill? Trembling, I rewound the cylinder, my fingers fumbling, the spring groaning in protest, and played it again. Silas, remember the lilacs? You stood beneath them and watched. There it was, unmistakable, deliberate, accusatory. No, I whispered, then louder. No, you are mistaken, Eliza. Or rather, the wax is flawed, the groove misread. It is my own guilt speaking, not yours. But even as I spoke, a terrible certainty took root in my mind. This phrase had not been there before. In 107 prior hearings, never once had she spoken of lilacs, or of watching. I played it a third time, a fourth. Each repetition carved the words deeper into my skull until they pulsed behind my eyes like a second heartbeat. You stood and watched, and then silence. Not the silence of the recording ending. No, this was different. The phonograph still whirred. The needle still traced its spiral path, but the world beyond the attic. The world had gone mute. I had not noticed it at first, so consumed was I by the voice in the horn. But now, as I stood panting in the center of the room, I perceived the absence with dreadful clarity. No wind in the eaves. No distant hoot of an owl. No creak of the old house settling into its bones. Even the river, usually a low, ceaseless murmur through the valley, had fallen utterly still, as if holding its breath in horror at what had just been spoken. I stumbled to the window, tore aside the heavy drapes, and pressed my face to the glass. The night was clear, the moon a cold silver disk above the skeletal trees. Below, the river lay black and glassy, reflecting nothing. Not a ripple, not a sigh. And then I saw it, or rather, I felt it, a flicker of movement at the edge of vision. Down by the bank where the lilacs once grew, now long drowned or uprooted, a figure stood, tall, still, facing the house. My breath fogged the pain. I blinked, and it was gone. A trick of the moonlight, I muttered, though my voice sounded thin and false even to my own ears. A shadow cast by the yew tree, but the yew stood 50 yards east of that spot. I turned from the window, my back to the glass, as if by not looking I could unsee what I had seen. My eyes fell upon the phonograph. The cylinder had finished its rotation. The needle rested at the end, quivering slightly, as though exhausted by revelation. And then, a new sound. Not from the machine, from the walls. A soft, wet dragging, like cloth pulled through mud. It came from the far corner near the stack of discarded diaphragms. I froze. The sound ceased. "Eliza," I called, my voice cracking like dry timber. No answer. Only the oppressive, suffocating silence of a world that had sealed its lips. I spent the remainder of the night huddled in the corner opposite the phonograph. A blanket pulled over my head like a child afraid of thunder. But there was no thunder, only the silence, thick and heavy as a shroud. And within that silence, my thoughts raced like rats in a cage. You stood beneath the lilacs. You saw her fall. You did not move. Had I? Memory, that fickle and treacherous servant, began to shift its sands. I recalled the scent of lilacs that afternoon, the warmth of the sun on my neck, the sound of her humming as she walked toward the river. And then, a flash, my own hand gripping the windowsill of the study, my eyes fixed on her white dress as she stepped too close to the crumbling bank, the sudden lurch of earth, her cry cut short, and me standing there, watching, too stunned to run, too paralyzed by some cowardly instinct to cry out. Oh, God! Was it true? Had I let her die while I stood like a statue beneath the lilacs, my mind still tangled in equations and frequencies? A sob tore from my throat, raw, animal, desperate. I pressed my fists to my temples as if I might crush the memory before it crushed me. And in that moment of abject despair, the phonograph sprang to life. I had not wound it. Yet the cylinder turned, slowly, deliberately, and from the horn came not Eliza's voice, but my own. "I saw you fall," it whispered in perfect mimicry of my tone, my cadence, my very breath, and I did nothing. I screamed. I seized the machine, wrenched the cylinder free, and hurled it against the wall. It struck the cork lining with a dull thud and fell to the floor, unbroken. The phonograph's spring unwound with a sigh, like a dying man releasing his last breath. Silence returned, but it was no longer empty. It was waiting. I sank to my knees, trembling, tears carving tracks through the dust on my cheeks. The truth, once glimpsed, could not be unseen. I had watched. I had failed her. And now, whether by madness or by some infernal justice, the dead would not let me forget. Outside, the first pale streaks of dawn touched the horizon, but no birds sang to greet it. The world remained mute, as if in mourning or in judgment. I gathered the cylinder from the floor. It felt warm in my hands, as though it had absorbed the fever of my guilt. I placed it back upon the spindle. Tonight, I would play it again, and I would listen, truly listen to what the dead have to say. In the days that followed the whispering of my own guilt from the horn, I resolved upon a course both scientific and sacrilegious. I would not merely listen to the dead, I would interrogate them. If Eliza's voice lingered in the grooves of wax, then it was but a matter of resonance, of frequency, of amplification. The soul, I reasoned, though reason had long since fled my chamber, is but vibration, thought made audible. And if thought can be captured, it can be clarified. Thus began my labor. I dismantled 3 of my finest phonographs, salvaging their diaphragms, their springs, their horns. From the cellar, I retrieved a set of tuning forks, C, G, D, tuned to the harmonic series I once believed could mimic the human larynx. Into glass tubes I poured quicksilver, for its density would carry sound without distortion. I strung copper wires from wall to wall, connecting fork to diaphragm to horn in a web of gleaming intent. At the center of it all, I mounted Eliza's cylinder upon a spindle of my own design, suspended in a cradle of silk threads to eliminate friction. I called it the resonance clarifier, but in my heart, I knew it for what it was, a seance machine. On the 3rd night of construction, as I soldered the final joint, a memory seized me, not gently, as recollection ought, but like a hand clamped over my mouth, dragging me backward through time. It was spring. The lilacs bloomed in riotous profusion along the riverbank, their perfume so thick it made the air sweet and heavy as wine. Eliza stood beneath them, her back to me, sketching in her leather-bound journal. She had taken to drawing the river lately, its currents, its eddies, the way light fractured upon its surface. "It is alive," she had told me once, her eyes distant. "It breathes. It hungers." I had laughed, kissed her temple, and returned to my workshop, dismissing her words as poetic fancy. But that afternoon, I watched her from the study window, not with love, not with concern, but with the detached curiosity of a man observing a natural phenomenon. She stepped closer to the bank, where the earth had grown soft from recent rains. Her slipper sank into the mud. She laughed, a bright, clear sound, and reached for a fallen branch to steady herself. Then the earth gave way. She cried out, not in terror but in surprise, as if the river had played a trick upon her. Her arms windmilled. Her journal flew open, pages fluttering like wounded birds. And I stood frozen, not because I did not care, oh God, no, but because in that instant I was a boy again, 8 years old, watching my younger brother slip beneath the mill pond's green scum, his hand reaching, while I stood on the bank too terrified to move, too certain that if I entered that water, I too would be swallowed. The memory struck me like a blow to the chest. The smell of algae, the gurgle of bubbles, the silence after his hand vanished. So I watched Eliza fall. I watched the river take her. And when her white dress disappeared beneath the black surface, I did not run. I did not shout. I turned from the window and walked, calmly, deliberately, back to my workbench where I adjusted the tension on a diaphragm spring as if nothing had occurred. Only when the silence grew too profound did I go to the bank. Only then did I find her shawl, snagged on a reed like a ghost's farewell. The soldering iron slipped from my fingers, searing my thigh. I barely felt the pain. The memory had left me gasping, drenched in sweat, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. So it was true. I had not merely seen, I had chosen the safety of my workshop over the peril of the river. Chosen the illusion of control over the chaos of love. And Eliza had known. That was why she recorded the message, not as a keepsake, but as an accusation. With trembling hands, I completed the clarifier. I wound the spring. I adjusted the tuning forks to vibrate at the frequency of the human voice in distress, a frequency I had measured years ago during experiments with weeping subjects. How cruelly that data now served me. I lowered the needle. The cylinder turned. The forks hummed. The mercury trembled in its tubes. And then, her voice, clearer than ever before, stripped of static, intimate as a breath against my ear. Silas, you let me drown because you were afraid. I staggered back, clutching my chest as if the words had pierced it. No, I cried. I loved you. You loved your silence more. The voice interrupted, calm, devastating. You loved your machines, your order, your quiet. The river was chaos, and chaos frightened you. Tears streamed down my face. She was right. Every word was a scalpel, flaying me bare. What would you have me do? I sobbed. Go to the river now. Throw myself in. Would that satisfy you? The recording continued, indifferent to my plea. You built a chamber to keep the world out, but you could not keep me in. I am in the wires now, in the hum of the springs, in the silence between your heartbeats. The forks began to vibrate of their own accord, though the cylinder had ceased turning. The mercury rose in the tubes, forming perfect, trembling spheres. The copper wires sang with a high, thin note, like the ringing in one's ears after a great explosion. And then, from the far wall, came a new sound. Drip, drip, drip. I turned slowly. Water seeped from the baseboard, black, reeking of river mud. It spread across the floorboards, glistening in the lamplight like oil. Eliza, I whispered. The dripping ceased. The mercury fell. The wires went silent. Only the phonograph remained active, though I had not rewound it. The cylinder spun again, faster now, the needle skipping across the groove like a stone upon water. And the voice, no longer hers, but a chorus of whispers, hissing from every corner of the room, spoke a single phrase over and over in perfect unison. You were watching. You were watching. You were watching. I covered my ears, but the sound was inside my skull. I fell to my knees in the spreading pool of river water. My sobs lost in the cacophony of my own guilt made audible. The clarifier had worked. Too well. It had not clarified the dead. It had awakened them, and they would not be silenced. After that night of the clarifier's dreadful success, I resolved to destroy the cylinder. Not merely discard it. No, that would be insufficient. I would annihilate it, reduce it to dust, scatter its atoms to the four winds so that not even memory might reassemble it. At dawn, I took the wax disc in my hands, still damp with river water, though the floor had long since dried, and carried it to the hearth in the library below. The fire had burned low, but embers glowed like the eyes of buried beasts. I cast the cylinder into the flames. It did not melt. Instead, it lay upon the coals, blackening but intact, and from its core issued a low, mournful hum. Eliza's voice, wordless yet unmistakable, rising with the smoke. The flames themselves seemed to recoil, as if repelled by the sanctity of her sorrow. Trembling, I seized the poker and crushed the cylinder beneath its iron weight. Wax splintered. The brass core bent. I ground it into the ash until nothing remained but fragments. Satisfied, foolishly satisfied, I returned to the attic, determined to dismantle the clarifier and restore silence to my life. But when I opened the door, the cylinder sat upon the spindle, whole, unblemished, gleaming as if newly cast. I stared. My breath caught in my throat like a fish on a hook. I approached slowly, half expecting it to vanish at my touch. But it was solid, cold, real. "This is madness," I whispered. "No," came the reply, not from the horn, but from the very air around me, soft as breath upon glass. "This is justice." I whirled about. The room was empty, yet the voice had been closer than my own shadow. From that hour, the attic ceased to be a room and became a throat. I noticed it first in the walls. The cork lining, once smooth and deadened, now pulsed faintly, rhythmically, as if the house itself drew breath. The felt drapes swelled and contracted like lungs. Even the floorboards sighed beneath my feet, releasing puffs of dust that smelled of river mud and lilacs. And the sounds. Oh, the sounds multiplied and mutated. The phonograph played without winding. The needle descended of its own accord. The cylinder turned with a will not my own. But worse, far worse, were the voices that came from places no machine could reach. In the pipes behind the wall, you hesitated. In the creak of the floorboard near the window, you turned away. In the rustle of my own coat as I paced, you let me sink. I tore the coat from my body and flung it into the corner, but the voice followed me, whispering now from the folds of the blanket on my cot, from the pages of my notebooks, from the very air I inhaled. Sleep became impossible. Not because I feared dreams, but because the waking world had become a nightmare more vivid than any slumber could conjure. I would sit for hours in the center of the room, hands clasped over my ears, rocking back and forth like a child, chanting, "I am alone, I am alone, I am alone." But I was not alone. She was in the silence between my words. She was in the space behind my eyes. One evening, as I stared into the darkened horn of the phonograph, I saw something move within its brass throat, a flicker of white, like a hand reaching up from a well. I recoiled, knocking over a jar of tuning forks. They clattered to the floor, and as they struck the boards, each emitted a single pure note. And from each note, her voice emerged, layered and harmonized. "Silas, Silas, Silas." I gathered the forks and hurled them through the window. Glass shattered. The night swallowed their fall without a sound. But the next morning, they lay upon my workbench, clean, unbroken, arranged in perfect chromatic order. That was when I understood. The house was no longer mine. It belonged to her, to the river, to the silence I had cultivated so carefully, now turned against me like a blade. I tried to leave. I packed a satchel with bread and a flask of water, wrapped my coat about me, though it whispered as I moved, and descended the stairs. The front door stood open, a thing it never did, for I kept it bolted against the world. Hope, frail and foolish, fluttered in my chest. I stepped onto the porch. The world beyond was white, not with snow, but with silence so absolute it had taken visible form. The trees stood frozen in mid-sway. The river lay like a sheet of polished obsidian, reflecting nothing. No wind, no birds, no distant hum of life. And then I saw them. Figures, dozens of them, standing in the fields along the road beneath the skeletal oaks, all facing the house. all still as statues, all wearing white dresses. Eliza's dress. I stumbled back, slamming the door, bolting it with shaking hands. I pressed my ear to the wood. From outside came a sound like 1,000 breaths drawn at once, then silence. I fled to the attic and barred the door. I collapsed upon the cot, weeping, laughing, babbling prayers to gods I no longer believed in. The phonograph began to play. Not the cylinder. The machine itself, its gears grinding, its spring unwinding, its horn emitting a low guttural moan that was not Eliza's voice, nor mine, but something older, hungrier, born of water and regret. And as it moaned, the walls of the attic began to weep. Not water, wax. Thick, brown, glistening wax oozed from the seams between the boards, from the nail holes, from the pores of the wood itself. It pooled upon the floor, spreading toward me like a tide. I scrambled onto the workbench, clutching my knees to my chest as the wax rose around me. It carried with it the scent of lilacs and river mud and something else, something metallic, like blood or rust. From the center of the pool, the cylinder rose, not floating, growing. Like a flower from dark soil, it emerged from the wax, whole and perfect, spinning slowly in the air, though nothing held it aloft. The needle descended, and her voice, clear, calm, final, filled the chamber. You built this room to keep the world out. Now it will keep you in. Forever. The wax reached the edge of the workbench. I screamed, but no sound came out. For the silence had entered me, and it would not let go. The wax rose to the edge of the workbench, thick and slow as congealing blood. It did not burn, nor chill. It simply was a substance of pure memory, oozing from the very bones of the house, summoned by guilt too long denied. I crouched upon the scarred wood, my back pressed to the wall, my breath shallow and useless, for the air itself had grown heavy with the weight of unspoken truth. The cylinder hovered before me, spinning in midair, its surface gleaming like an eye. The needle, suspended above it, trembled, not with mechanical vibration, but with anticipation. "Speak," the voice commanded, not from the horn, not from the walls, but from the center of my own skull, as if my brain had become a diaphragm tuned to damnation. "Confess what you did." "I have confessed," I cried, my voice cracking like dry reed. "I watched, I froze, I let her drown. Is that not enough?" "No," came the reply, calm, inexorable. "You have told the facts, but you have not spoken the truth. What truth remains?" I sobbed. "What more is there?" The cylinder spun faster. The wax surged, lapping at the legs of the bench. And then, suddenly, I understood. It was not enough to admit I had seen her fall. The truth was darker, deeper. I had wanted her gone. Not in conscious thought, no. The mind shields itself from such monstrosities. But in the secret chambers of the heart where love curdles into possession, where devotion becomes a cage. I had grown weary of her sorrow, her dreams of rivers and stars, her refusal to live within the quiet, ordered world I had built for us. She was too alive, too wild, too full of questions I could not answer with gears and wax. And so when the earth gave way, a part of me rejoiced. Not in joy, but in relief. The silence she left behind was the silence I had always craved. Oh God, to name it is to damn oneself utterly. Yet the words rose in my throat like bile, burning, insistent, demanding release. "I did not only watch," I whispered, then louder, my voice raw with revelation. I let her go, because her light was too bright for my shadows, because I preferred the echo to the voice. The moment the words left my lips, the cylinder shattered, not with a crash, but with a sigh, as if it had been holding its breath for years. Shards of wax and brass dissolved into mist, vanishing before they struck the floor. The wax receded. The walls ceased their weeping. For a single, blessed moment, silence returned, not the judgmental hush of before, but the true, empty quiet of absolution. I slid from the bench, fell to my knees in the damp residue, and wept, not in terror, but in grief, pure and unadulterated. At last, I mourned her not as a ghost, but as a woman I had failed in life. Then, the phonograph began to play. I had not touched it. The cylinder was gone. Yet the horn emitted a sound, soft, rhythmic, familiar, thump, 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 my own heartbeat, amplified, recorded, played back, and woven into its rhythm a new voice, Eliza's, but gentler now, almost tender. You have spoken the truth. Now you may join me. Join you? I whispered. In death? In silence, she replied. The only place where love and guilt can rest together. Madness flared one last time, a final, desperate surge of the ego. I would not go quietly. I would not surrender to the river, to the wax, to the voice in my head. With a roar, I seized the phonograph, my masterpiece, my curse, and hurled it against the far wall. Brass shattered, gears scattered like broken teeth. The horn split in two, its mouth gaping like a silent scream. "Begone!" I shrieked. "I will not be haunted." The room fell still. I stood panting, triumphant, for 3 breaths. Then, from the shards of the horn, the voice returned, faint, but clear. "You cannot destroy me, Silas. I am not in the machine." It came from the tuning fork lying near my foot. "I am not in the wax," from the cork lining of the wall. "I am not in the river," from the floorboard beneath my heel. "I am in you." And then I heard it, not with my ears, but within the marrow of my bones, the chambers of my heart, the folds of my brain. Join me in the silence. It was not a command. It was an invitation. And I was so very tired of noise, of lies, of living in a world where the dead speak clearer than the living. I walked to the window, the one I had shattered days ago, now inexplicably whole again, and looked down upon the river. Moonlight silvered its surface, and there, standing knee-deep in the current, was Eliza. Not drowned, not spectral, just waiting, her hand outstretched. The attic door stood open behind me. The stairs waited. The river called. I took one step forward, and the phonograph, though broken, played one final phrase, not from its horn, but from my own lips, as if my body had become the machine. "I am coming, Eliza." And for the first time since her death, I meant it. Extract from the journal of Mr. Alistair Finch, solicitor to the estate of Silas Vorne, October 17th, 18. I arrived at Vorne Manor this morning, under gray skies and a persistent drizzle, tasked with inventorying the late inventor's effects for probate. The house stood as described in the coroner's report, shuttered, silent, and steeped in an atmosphere of profound desolation. No body was ever recovered, neither Vorne's nor his wife's, though the river yielded a woman's shawl and, weeks later, a man's pocket watch. Stopped at 3:17 a.m. The servants had long since fled, claiming the attic breathed at night. Superstitious nonsense, I thought, until I ascended the stairs. The upper chamber was precisely as Vorne left it. Workbenches cluttered with brass instruments, walls lined with sound-deadening cork, heavy drapes drawn against the light. Yet the air was thick with the scent of lilacs and damp earth, a most unnatural combination for late autumn. Upon the central table sat a phonograph, shattered beyond repair. Gears lay scattered like bones. The horn was split cleanly in two, and yet Atop the spindle rested a single wax cylinder, intact, unmarked, gleaming faintly in the gloom. Curiosity overcame caution. I wound the spring, though it offered no resistance, as if already spent, and lowered the needle. Nothing played. Only silence. Not the absence of sound, but that peculiar weighted silence one feels in a room where a great sorrow has recently been spoken aloud. I stood there for some minutes, foolishly expecting, I know not what. A voice? A sigh? None came. As I turned to leave, I glanced back and saw it. The needle, though the spring was unwound and the cylinder motionless, trembled, not from vibration, but as if listening. I left the manor at once, locking the door behind me, though I doubt it matters. The dead do not require doors. I have sealed the cylinder in a lead-lined box and placed it in my office safe. I tell myself it is for preservation, but the truth is simpler. I cannot bear to hear what might play if, by some accident of dust or draught, the needle should fall again. For I am certain, though reason scoffs, that if one were to listen very closely, in the deepest hour of night, one would not hear a recording. One would hear a breath, and perhaps a whisper. You are watching. Addendum to the Journal of Mr. Alistair Finch. Continued, October 18th, 22nd, 18th. I returned to my office in town last evening, with the lead-lined box clutched to my chest like a stolen relic. Rain slicked the cobblestones, and gas lamps cast long, wavering shadows that seemed to lean toward me as I passed. I told myself it was fatigue. The manor had unnerved me more than I cared to admit. Yet sleep eluded me, not from fear, surely not, but from a persistent, low-frequency hum that seemed to emanate from the safe in the corner of my study. I checked it thrice, locked, sealed, undisturbed. Still, the sound remained, a vibration felt more in the molars than heard by the ear, like the memory of a tuning fork struck long ago. This morning, I sought out old Mrs. Gable, who once served as housekeeper at Vorne Manor. She lives now in a cottage on the village outskirts, her mind frayed by age and what she calls the river dreams. She refused to see me at first, peering through lace curtains with eyes wide as saucers. But when I mentioned Eliza's name, the door creaked open. She offered tea gone cold and spoke in a voice like dry leaves skittering over stone. Miss Eliza, she began, hands trembling around a chipped cup, was never meant for that house, nor for him. I leaned forward. Mr. Vorne was devoted, was he not? Devoted. She let out a brittle laugh. He loved her like a man loves a song he's recorded, more for the perfection of the copy than the soul who sang it. He'd sit for hours in that attic, playing her voice back, adjusting the diaphragm, muttering about clarity, but he never asked what she meant, only how it sounded. She fell silent, staring into the dregs of her tea as if reading omens. Before she died, she whispered, she painted, not with oils, no, with ink and river water. Strange things. The manor with eyes in the windows, the river coiled like a serpent around the lilacs, Mr. Vorne standing beneath a tree with his hands bound in wire. She called them warnings. He called them hysterics, and locked the sketches in the cellar. Did you see them? I asked. Once. After she vanished, I went down with a lantern. But the cellar was flooded, not with rain, mind you, but with black water that smelled of mud and lilacs. And the drawings, they were gone, washed away, I thought. But the next morning, I found one stuck to the attic door, damp, curling at the edges. It showed the phonograph, but the horn was a woman's throat and the cylinder was a heart wrapped in wire. She shuddered. I burned it, but the smoke, it sang. I left her cottage with more questions than answers, yet one truth settled in my bones. Silas Vorne was not merely a victim. She was a seer, and Silas, in his arrogance, had mistaken her visions for weakness. From the recovered sketchbook of Silas Vorne, found tucked behind a loose brick in the manor's cellar, water-stained but legible. April 3rd. Silas has built another device, a harmonic resonator, he calls it. Claims it can isolate the frequency of joy from that of sorrow in a human voice. I asked him why one would wish to separate them. He looked at me as if I'd spoken in tongues. Because sorrow distorts, he said. It clouds the signal. But sorrow is the signal, Silas. It tells us what matters. Tonight, I walked to the river. The current whispered my name, not in warning, in welcome. It knows I listen. April 17th, I recorded my voice for him today. A keepsake, I said, smiling. He kissed my forehead and returned to his workshop before the wax had cooled. But I did not speak of lilacs or love. I spoke of the bank crumbling, of the earth sighing beneath my feet, of the way the water reaches up, not down. Let him hear it when I'm gone. Let him finally listen. May 1st, the river dreams grow stronger. Last night, I stood knee-deep in its current, clothed in white, and watched Silas through the window of his study. He saw me fall. He did not move. And in the dream, I forgave him. But dreams lie. May 2nd, I made a new recording. This time, I gouged the wax with my fingernail, where the truth must cut deepest. Let the static be the sound of his conscience tearing open. If he repairs it with his blood, as I suspect he will, then his guilt will bind us forever. Good. Journal of Mr. Alistair Finch. Continued October 19th. I returned to the manor today, driven by a compulsion I cannot name. The groundskeeper's daughter, a girl of 16 named Lila, met me at the gate. She's the last soul who dares walk the property, tending the overgrown garden. For Miss Eliza's sake, she says. She comes back, Lila told me, braiding a strand of river reed between her fingers. Not as a ghost. Ghosts are loud. She comes as silence. You'll be talking, and suddenly, the birds stop. The wind holds its breath. That's her. I asked if she'd ever seen Silas after Eliza's death. Once, she said, eyes downcast. 3 nights before he vanished. He stood at the riverbank in his nightshirt, barefoot in the mud. He kept saying, "I'm listening now, I'm listening." Then he knelt and pressed his ear to the water. When he stood, his cheek was streaked with black mud and tears. She paused, then added softly, "He looked like a man who'd finally heard the thing he'd spent his life trying not to hear." Her words clung to me as I re-entered the attic. This time, I brought a candle. The air was colder, the scent of lilacs sharper, and on the workbench, where I'd left only scattered gears, I found a single sheet of paper, covered in Silas's cramped script. It appears to be the final entry he never finished. The resonance clarifier was never meant to summon her. It was meant to silence her. But sound cannot be silenced, only transformed. And guilt, I have learned, is the purest frequency of all. It resonates through bone, through wire, through wax. It does not decay. It amplifies. Last night, I dreamt I was the cylinder. Eliza's voice carved into me, groove by groove, and Silas, no, I lowered the needle again and again, each pass deepening the wound, each playback a fresh flaying. I woke with wax in my hair. The house breathes my name. The river answers. There's only one way to end the recording, become the silence it seeks. I go to her now, not as penitent, not as lover, but as echo. Let the river take what it is owed. Below this, scrawled in a shakier hand, she is not in the water. She is the water. Journal of Mr. Alistair Finch, continued October 21st. I have not slept. Not truly. Each night I wake at 3:17 a.m., the hour stamped on Vorne's recovered pocket watch, to the sound of dripping, not from the pipes, from the safe. I press my ear to its cold metal and hear it, the faint, rhythmic plink, plink, plink of water falling into stillness. Last night, I opened the safe. The lead-lined box sat undisturbed. But when I lifted the lid, the cylinder was damp, not with condensation, with river water, and wrapped around its base, like a ribbon, was a single strand of white lilac, impossibly fresh. I should have destroyed it then, cast it into the furnace at the ironworks, as I first intended. But something stayed my hand. Perhaps it was curiosity. Perhaps it was the same fatal fascination that doomed Silas. I carried the cylinder home. Tonight, I placed it upon my own Edison machine, a gift from my father, unused for years. My hands shook as I wound the spring, not from fear, but from a terrible gnawing hope that I might hear her, that I might understand. The needle descended. At first, only hiss, then a voice. Not Eliza's, not Silas's, mine, speaking words I have never uttered aloud. You knew the will was forged. You knew Mrs. Vorne's sister contested it, but you accepted Vorne's payment anyway. You buried the evidence. You called it professional discretion. You called it pragmatism, but it was silence, and silence is complicity. I wrenched the cylinder free, my breath ragged. My sins are mundane compared to Silas's, yet the machine knew them. How? Unless the cylinder does not play recordings. It plays confessions. Not what was said, but what was hidden. I sit now in my study, the cylinder on the desk before me gleaming like an eye. Outside, the wind has stilled. The clock on the mantel has stopped. Even the coal in the grate has ceased its crackling. And I realize with dawning horror, I am no longer the solicitor cataloging a tragedy. I am its next subject. Final entry, October 22nd. I have made my decision. I will return the cylinder to the attic, not to destroy it. Destruction is a form of denial, and denial is what fed this horror in the first place. No, I will place it back upon the broken phonograph, exactly as I found it. Let it rest in the silence it was made for. But first, I must record my own truth. I have taken a blank wax cylinder from my father's collection. I speak into the horn now, my voice raw with shame. My name is Alistair Finch. I profited from grief. I chose convenience over justice. And when I stood in that attic, I did not see a madman's ruin. I saw a mirror. I am watching, and I am guilty. I seal the cylinder in wax. I will leave it beside Eliza's. Perhaps one day another will find it, another listener, another sinner. Let them hear what we could not say in life. Let them learn that some silences are not empty. They are waiting, postscript, found, tucked inside the solicitor's journal, unsigned. The river does not drown the guilty. It drowns the silent. Speak, and you may be saved. Stay quiet, and the wax will grow in your throat.